So I'm with the American Eagle Gold team, Tony and Neil, and this is the start of the biggest drill program ever in the history of the company, in the history of the project, the NAC Porphyry Copper Gold Project in the Babine region of BC. So just last week, American Eagle announced the drill campaign is underway, 30,000 meter program. So I want to start with Tony, and then we'll kind of go back and forth. But Tony, this is the biggest drill program in the history of the company, a young company. It's the biggest program, I think, in your history. How does it feel? Are you nervous at all?
Um, First of all, it feels great. I think it's also the biggest drill program in the history of the region. I don't think Morrison ever did a drill program this big, or Beller Grand Isle, at least in a year period. So it's definitely exciting. I'm not nervous. We put a lot of good work in it. We've seen great holes each year. We're just kind of piecing this puzzle together. And look, the team has put in a ton of hard work. We're actually drilling off a really sophisticated model that we built, and we got a lot of help during the off season from South 32. They had a lot of members of their team putting effort in this, working with us of where the collars should go. So I'm just hoping Mother Nature works out, but there's just been too many drill holes for this not to work out. So I'm excited, expecting a lot of surprises that NAC always gives, and a lot of news flow. But we're not going to live or die by each drill hole. We're going to hit all the drill holes we put in our news release. Also, let people know that probably only 60% of the drill holes are actually in our news release. Obviously, the plan will develop and the plan will change as we hit things.
So yeah, so not all the planned holes are in the plan map, I guess is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can't really show that. We just want to give people an idea of what our plan was, but our plans never really stayed the same for each of our 3 years, which is a good thing. But look, our models, like I said, very sophisticated with a lot of help from Neil, Charlie, South 32. So, I think more than most years, those collars that you see, probably 80% of them will be hit.
Okay. And let's turn to Neil now. So you're the lead geo or the VPX. I'm not sure what the official title is now. Where
I'm
are
not
the
either.
what you're not either. Well, you're the guy in charge of the drill program, so there you go.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's two rigs I saw on X in those pictures. So where are the rigs at now, and what are they targeting?
Well, it's still early season, so we're still very much in the breakup season here. There's a lot of moisture in the ground. There's still snow in the trees and on some of the old historical access trails. So we've made a logistical decision to start in the south zone, which is one of the most accessible and the easiest to string the water line to. And it also happens to be a very, very good target. So right now we're actually trying to expand our deeper south zone mineralization that we encountered in 17 and 31 along this what appears to be very nicely mineralized corridor out to the west. And then we've stepped south of the south zone. So our rig 2 collar is about 100 meters away from any previous surface location of drilling, and drilling underneath the south zone to the north. Yeah, so these are both holes that are designed to sort of push the envelope of where we currently understand our mineralization to lie. And as Tony was saying, it's really nice to have this model up because we're predictive for what kind of rock we're going to be in throughout a lot of this main zone drilling. So it's really nice. We expect to hit conglomerate around 116 meters. We hit it at 120 meters. That's pretty good. So we've got some good confirmation of the modeling work this off season already, just off these first few holes. So yeah.
So both rigs are in the south, gold zone. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And we've been spending this time while the rigs are set up and drilling on these locations to prep some of the sites to the north. And the plan will be, it's a bit more accessible than I was anticipating, up to the far north of the holes we have planned right now to push the envelope of the broader mineralized trend further. That will likely be where rig 2 is moving next. So we'll have one rig testing the south zone targets for skid rig, and we'll have one rig bumping up to the north and flushing out that area. And then, like Tony said, the follow up is really going to depend on what we hit and what the rocks tell us.
Okay. And when does the third rig arrive, you think?
The third rig is likely going to arrive sometime in August. There's quite a bit of moisture. A lot of the sites that actually look like really good locations to put the drill right now are in these sort of low-lying ephemeral marshes. So right now it's pretty soft and it's still snow covered. So it'll be ideal for that to dry up a little bit. So August will be optimal for that. And then once these areas are prepped, these sites are prepped, they remain good to drill throughout the winter, right, once it freezes up. So yeah, we'll just give nature a little bit of time to let us get in there, and then once we can get the pad set, then we're good to drill it whenever we want.
So to do 30,000 meters, you're probably going to be drilling till almost the end of the year, right?
That's the plan. Yeah. If the plan right now is to bring the third rig in August, that'll put us around 30,000 meters kind of by the beginning, first week or so of December. We go by our previous season meters rates.
Okay. And with the two holes that are turning now, can you tell us any more about sort of where they're targeting the gold zone? So I recall there's room to test that further to the west and to maybe the southwest. Are you going to be trying to, do that this year?
That's exactly what these two holes are doing right now, and
Oh,
then the
nice.
follow up in this area is gonna expand out from there. I mean, there's also room to the north as well. It's a complicated zone. There's an overlapping instance of stockwork mineralization, some better mineralized conglomerates just down below the south zone that the historical operators never encountered, and then that kind of feeds directly into the better mineralization we see deeper along the margin of the Porphyry Stock. So it's all kind of bleeding together now. It's just the south zone is very nice, high grade, discrete gold at surface. We'd really like to get the best handle we can on the footprint of that.
And when do you think you get over to the IP Embayment Zone and start to test some of those targets to the southeast?
I was hiking over that yesterday with my my co-manager on site, Dave here. So it's yeah, we're going to be starting to prep those sites, sling lumber in, get the pads ready to go. Yeah, basically as soon as we mobilize the helicopter onto site, they become testable. So that those embayment holes to the south, yeah, we're not as hamstrung by nature there. There's a lot of really nice forest that's very amenable for, barely have to take down any trees. Certainly no large timber to set up pads in those areas. So yeah.
To add,
Okay.
if I could add something in there, so I get a lot of feedback. Go to those big step outs, right away. We want to see them. We're going to hit them eventually. It's one of the benefits and luxuries, as I want to say, of having a balance sheet that we can kind of do what we want. It's about being most efficient. You look after your pennies, the nickels look after themselves. These skid holes have to be drilled regardless. So we're going to hit them. And then, that one rig that Neil's talking about, that's a helicopter rig. That's the one that's going to be doing those big steps to the south, to the east, to the northeast, etc. And when you convert a skid rig to a heli rig, it's not very efficient to kind of convert it back. So we'd rather kind of test those areas. And if we're really onto something, and then we'll convert another skid rig full time to have double support from two rigs doing those big step outs. And I'm talking about step outs that we need for helicopters, but when we're going to the north for our third hole on rig, so our third hole, which is the second rig for hole 2, those holes to the north also are big step outs. They're just not helicopter holes because, again, we have the luxury of being able to access that via road. And that's what Neil and Dave have been doing for the last few days. So those holes that we're going north that are kind of in no man's land where there hasn't been historical drilling, we're actually able to use a skid rig to access that, which is actually fantastic. So those are kind of some of the details that I wanted to share.
Okay. And Tony, so like a lot of investors tend to think, oh, now the drill program has started, so now we have to wait 2 months for assays, and there'll be no news flow for 2 months. So what can you tell us about the timing of news flow and how what kind of sort of updates we might expect over the next couple of months?
Look, news flow, once it starts, it's going to be quite regular. I don't want to predict when the first assays are going to come out, probably at some point in July, but once they're out, they'll be a lot more regular. I'm hoping to have, as Peter Brown says, keep on feeding the beast, have news every 3 weeks. But you know what? We're drilling 30,000 meters. We're fully funded. We have 2 partners. So people that are worried about the news flow, they're just worried about trading the stock, not necessarily buying and holding the stock. So we're just going to follow our plan, and we'll be a lot more efficient in terms of releasing the assays. And if they're great, amazing. If they're not as great, we'll explain why they may not have hit and how they're helping us to understand the system. Obviously, you can't hit 1,000% hit rate, but that's kind of the news flow there. We did mag. I think the mag that we did in terms of all the geophysics that's been done on our property, and maybe Neil can correct me, it's probably been the most beneficial to us. And we just got that 3 weeks ago. We paid an expert to do some MVI and inversion and some analysis on that. And we're working on that right now. We're hoping to eventually put that out on a news release with the report to show what it shows us and how it helps us define the structure. In terms of other news, it'd be good to have a top up from South 32 or a right to maintain, albeit not a lot of money. But I think what the market wants to see is that, South 32 is willing to maintain. It shows that they still have faith in the property, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. So, not huge news there, but I think it gives a really good signal to the market. So all things to kind of look out for.
What do you mean by a top up?
So 32 has a right to maintain any sort of dilution that happens. So we had a bit of dilution after they did the main investment. There is 1 million shares that we had to give to Bernie Kraft to exercise our option. Shout out to Bernie Kraft. And, one of the main reasons I think our stock went down, I think multiple reasons. I think, our expectations maybe didn't, meet the market's expectations. And then you got 6 months of no catalyst that kind of kills the stocks. And then at the same time, when we released our last results, we had about 2.5 million warrants that got exercised. That really exasperated the the downwards pressure on our stock. So that's where the dilution came from. So not a huge dilution, call it 3.5 million shares, but still enough to kind of send a bit of a signal to the market if South 32 wants to maintain.
I see. So if they want to maintain at 19.9%, they could purchase another like 600,000 shares from the company.
Around 1 million shares, I think.
Okay, 1 million shares. Okay, got it. Okay, and when do they have to, do that by?
Yeah, we're giving them some flexibility on that. Obviously, they invested $29 million at 87.5 cents. So we're not going to be sheriffs here and saying you have a couple days. We're just letting them have some time. And when the news happens, it happens if it does.
Okay, got it. So going back to the drill program. So at the end of last year, one of the big focuses was this potential jewel box. I want to get an update on what the thinking is around, the jewel box. Are you still trying to hunt for that in the copper, north zone, or is there any new strategy in terms of trying to find that?
Yeah, there's a number of holes planned that are designed to follow up into the center of our kind of sulfide speciation model right now. But a complicating factor of that is the fact that we've really only drilled one side of this radial target. So it's still a focus, and the thinking hasn't changed all that much from when we've discussed it previously. But part of the plan there is to test at depth, but also color these holes from a surface location that pushes the bounds of our current mineralization footprint as well into some prospective zones that are next to historical drilling. So yeah, we've got a few holes planned that I'm pretty excited about drilling, and they'll be, we'll be putting the rig on those spots before too long.
The Porphyry Stock, this big structure in the center of the project, it was never really a target area in the past. It was never something that was really talked about. But I noticed that potentially there's going to be a few holes that you're going to test that will go into the Porphyry Stock. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, we know from the added amount of confidence we've had in our understanding of the timing of the system and the timing of the different intrusive events. We know the Porphyry Stock is earlier than the best mineralized intrusive rocks on the property. So we have this copper-bearing dike that cuts the porphyry stock. We have these serrate texture intrusives with bornite mineralization that cuts the porphyry stock. So the presence of the porphyry stock doesn't mean that you're out of the prospective mineralization. In fact, it looks like a lot of these features trend into the porphyry stock. And so that's kind of the thinking partly with some of these holes that are targeted. There's also some geophysical targets within there. Like Tony mentioned, there's that magnetic survey. We know that there is a lower magnetic response with some of these later stage dikes. They don't have the primary magnetite that we see in the porphyry stock. So there's some magnetic structural features that run through the porphyry stock that are of interest to test, and these coincide with some deeper resistivity anomalies as well. So there's some merit to the targets other than just tracing out these dikes. So there's a couple lines of evidence for some of the locations that have been picked within the porphyry stock to test this season.
Okay. Tony, let's talk about some other topics. What about the Awale news? So you're a member of the board at Awale. They got an investment from Fortuna today for, I don't know, $8.8 million at a premium with no warrants. What's your take on the Awale news?
Look, absolutely fantastic deal. You hit it right on the head. There's no ROFR, there's no warrants. It's sort of like when South 32 came in with us after Tech. It just gives it that second level of credibility. It shows that ODN, is the real deal. And I think the big important thing is, I think a lot of the big overhang is two things. I think it's that, that deal, right or wrong, that happened last year. Obviously, I think Awale was in a bit of the penalty box. So this allows the company who has mostly new management to have a reset. It also allows them to, kind of fight the overhang that they have with the Newmont JV. It gives them money and ability to drill their 100% owned ground, which quite frankly, I think is just as prospective as the current ground that they made the discoveries on. It just hasn't been drilled, but they have a lot of the same signatures and targets. So they're going to drill that and hopefully fast forward that, and they have the funds to do it. So it's an absolutely amazing deal that, I'm happy that they did.
By the way, it's 8.26 million, not 8.8 million. What about the IAMGOLD royalty on the Cote Gold Mine? There's a big transaction where Franco acquired a royalty, a pretty large royalty on the Cote Gold Mine for $1 billion American. What's your take on that?
That is a crazy deal. I obviously worked at IAMGOLD for 10 years. I think it's a really good case study to show that if you have money and patience and you hold a royalty, you can make a lot of money. Obviously, a lot of people don't have a ton of cash and they sell those royalties out pretty early. But the guys that had that royalty, they actually acquired it via the very, very early days before Trelawney, which IAMGOLD bought, as a lien to a loan. So they got that for $1 million. And fast forward 20 years later, it's worth 1.56 billion Canadian because they sold a 1% NSR to Royal Gold for $100 million US. And they sold that to Franco-Nevada for 1.05 billion. I thought, and I was of the understanding when I was at IAMGOLD that MPI was actually a participating interest, which means, for example, if Cote spends $3.5 billion on their project, those guys have to pay 7.5% of that $3.5 billion before they get any payback. And I think that they fought the courts and they turned it into a non-participating, which essentially made that, a really valuable asset. And I think the value of that went up exponentially from $50 million from when I was there to over 1.05 billion. I think it's also a good case study for IAMGOLD or any big company for that matter. You have to figure out some of these quote unquote warts when you have them early on, because they're going to come up and, sneak up on you and end up costing you a lot of money. And, it didn't cost IAMGOLD a lot of money because they never had it. But had they sorted that out, let's say for $50 to $80 million 5 years ago when they could have, now they would have had the flexibility to sell that and have $1 billion extra in their treasury. But from IAMGOLD's perspective, I think it's also a really good deal because now it kind of shows the value of Cote. So If 7.5% of it's worth 1.05 billion, what's the other 92.5% worth to IAMGOLD? Also, I just think there's a bit of an issue with the person that had that property. I don't think they had access to the data room, so obviously a pain in the butt to try and get some of that data, figure out what they owe. So Franco-Nevada had an exclusivity to do the deal, which IAMGOLD granted them, and in exchange, they have the ability to buy back half of that NPI at any point in the next 3 years in two different tranches. Which again, I've always said IAMGOLD is probably the next company, along with Artemis, to be bought out. So probably cleans them up a bit as well. And just a little bit of trivia: that person that had that royalty is the same person that invented and started Two Bite Brownie, which is a big snack in Canada. So I think a lot of people listening to that will know about that. So it's an amazing story for both sides. Good for Franco, great for the Two Bite Brownie family, and also good for IAMGOLD. The same way Sumitomo gave them some money for a part of their property when they needed to give it some valuation, this did the same thing. So congrats to Renault and the team on that.
Yeah, so the royalty is for 7.5% of the operating profits of the Cote Gold Mine, and the holder of the royalty is not on the hook for capex for the mine.
They were supposed to. I believe there's some reps and warranties signed to that, but when you're a small company facing a big company, sometimes the court favors you. So I'm guessing they spent $5-10 million in legal just to get that, but. Yeah, it's almost better than a free operating cash flow. Essentially, their cost is about $900, $1,100 per ounce. So they get, 7.5% of whatever the production is, $1,000 cost. So it's some big cash flow coming to Franco-Nevada for sure.
Wow, that's a great story. I'd be very interested in hearing the entire story of how that royalty came about and how it evolved and who made the big score on that one. That's a huge transaction. It definitely is validation for Cote asset and good for IAG and its valuation. And you're right. I mean, I think that is one of the next acquisition targets in the gold mining sector. Let's go. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just to say one more thing about Cote, that's a great mine. It has huge expansion for the current Cote pit. But they have a project right next door, a few kilometers away, called Gosselin, and that's under a lake. But so is Cote. That's going to be just as big as Cote. So they essentially have two Cotes right on the same property. So it's a world-class jurisdiction. It's just going to get bigger. It's very valuable.
I'm waiting for that bigger company to come in and make an offer. Let's go back to Neil. Neil, the Steve Garwin presentation. I mean, this was a very technical presentation. It's on YouTube. I invite anybody who's interested in porphyries and NAC and American Eagle to watch that. It might be a little heavy for some, but I'm just interested in your discussions with Mr. Garwin. Did he point you to any of his favorite targets at NAC, and what were some of your key takeaways?
Well, first off, it was a really good validation of the modeling work that we've been able to do over the past few years. And it was a really good, it was the first time we've really taken the data as a whole and given it to somebody to process independently in the same kind of way we were working on it. So it was really good to get that validation, and that the process that we're undertaking at NAC is the right one for advancing the discovery. As for his targets, there was pretty broad agreement between what he'd independently identified and what we'd come to see as the more prospective zones down deep to the northeast, and then expanding out on surface throughout the areas we've laid out targets in. It was also really interesting talking to him about, I'm not sure if this was in the presentation, but just talking to him about some of the other methods that he's used and seen teams use on other projects. Once it gets to the point where you're on to a potential resource, something economic, how you go about collecting that data so that it can be continued to use to have success in expanding out the drilling. So it was very informative on a lot of fronts, and also very validating of the work that the team's been doing.
Does anybody have a question? Nate or anybody else, if you have a question for Tony or Neil, go ahead and pop up here and I'll activate your speaker mic. Tony, the Joy project, which is in BC, it's partially owned by a neighboring company of American Eagle. What's your take on what's going on there with them in Freeport?
Yeah, I saw the news release today. It's quite interesting. It's, if you read the tea leaves, it looks like Freeport is not participating in their 10%, and Amarc's going to wait a little bit longer to decide whether or not they want to drill. It's a sophisticated deal. Bob Dickinson, who's one of the best in the industry at making deals, essentially got a free carry through. He spent $35 million to drill this project, made that fantastic discovery. But now they got to decide, Freeport's got to decide, do they want to spend $75 million to get an extra 10%, which makes the valuation of that property $750 million when Amarc's only worth $110 million. I'm guessing they don't participate. It'll be a 60-40, and then Amarc's got to match 40% of whatever Freeport spends. So I'm not sure if they're going to drill next year unless Amarc's going to raise some money, or, by the hands of God, Freeport decides to do that deal. But, big companies are pretty smart, so it's not a deal I would do. What I'm really interested about Amarc is the fact that they're drilling Duke. I kind of want them to do at Duke what they did at Joy for TDG and Finley, make a big discovery. And a little birdie told me that apparently one of their first drill holes is going right on the western border of our property. So I'm hoping that they hit and bring some more attention to the Great Knack project.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're drilling at Duke right now.
They're drilling at Duke the same time we are. So I think we both started mobbing it around the same time.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's not hard to see where their drills are, especially with the helicopter.
They spent $10 million. They have a $10 million program, so it's a big program. Their land's a lot more difficult to access, so most of it is helicopter access. But they're drilling, and Boleden's their partner, and they're funding their exploration. So we wish them the best of luck, and to Diane and the team.
Absolutely. Nate, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hey guys, great coverage and rundown here of the kickoff of the drilling of the season. Yeah, I guess I got two things here. One of them would be the touch from Charlie there when he was describing that this year you guys will be doing some oriented core. How's that progressing? And then what are some of the initial uses of it you guys are going to be seeing, or value of it seeing here from the drilling that you're starting with?
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about the utility of the oriented core for NAC, at least as I can see it right now from what we've drilled in the past, is going to be really useful on getting a better characterization of the orientation of the mineralized veins. That's going to be the key feature that we're picking out. We know there's multiple orientations. We can see veins intersecting at all kinds of angles in the core. But to properly characterize that can help us understand, potentially understand the geometry of the deposit, especially as we start to work around it. We can see how these veins are replaced, if they're coming out of a radial center, or if it's a true sort of chaotic stockwork. So there's a lot of information we can get to it. Another useful thing would be bedding. We don't typically observe nice, clean bedding. It's pretty rare, but actually in this latest conglomerate we've just got on the table today, there's some interbeds of sandstone, and there's actually really nice bedding orientations visible. So that also is quite helpful. With enough bedding orientation measurements, you can start to understand a lot about the structure, not just about the way the beds themselves are oriented, but any of the folding structure in the region as well. So potentially a lot of really useful information coming out of this.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And then the other one I had was, you mentioned you're out and about, and there was also the talk of the initial surface mapping team. Has all that wrapped up? And what have you guys found, or is there any comments you can make on some of your own walkabout for some of the surface outcrop searching and some of the pre-work that you're doing there?
Yeah, so there was that was mainly filling in the gaps of the previous field traverses, just to make sure that we've covered the ground as best we can. So yeah, there were a few more outcrops highlighted by the fairly brief mapping effort, and a few more mineralized outcrops too. So that's they're working up the maps as we speak, and I don't know if it's changed our approach significantly, but it's really good information to have, especially as we start to step further out of our known drilling zone where you have really good control in the geology, having some information from surface outcrops, however sparse, is a lot better of a place to start from when you start to try and interpret the drill geology in the subsurface. So yeah, it's no, it went well, it went smoothly, and yeah, that's wrapped up now and made way for the drilling.
Great. And then the other item that you touched on there was the MVI study. That's still advancing. That's not available as of yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, we actually have a meeting with the geophysicist who's put it together tomorrow, and going to go over with our team and help us understand that and see how we can implement that into the models if it looks like it's been going to be useful. So yeah, already even the 2D maps that were produced were quite good, and showed a bit more detail and subtlety in the internal structure of the Porphyry Stock. So that's, yeah, interesting stuff, and that's going to dictate, I think, how we decide to target some of those holes that are designed to go into the Porphyry Stock that we talked about a bit earlier.
No, that's great. Yeah, I look forward to a future update on what that looks like in yield. So great. Okay, well, with that, I'll say good luck for this year's drilling and let you go here.
Thanks, Nate. Neil, I got one more question for you. As far as the favorable, host rocks at NAC, are they the same, like all throughout the property, or are they, does it vary by zone?
Yeah. So the South Stockwork zone is just it's a quartz stockwork in a altered porphyry host. So that that obviously controls the distribution and the style of mineralization in that area. Marginal to the stock, the conglomerate and some of the coarser sandstone seem to be the better host. And then there's some rocks that just seem to be in proximity to the dikes or the dikes themselves that are also really good targets. We don't have as good a handle as we start to step broadly around the property on what the best host rocks are, because we just don't have information of what the host rocks actually are. It was interesting to note that a hole 19 that we drilled, one of the earlier holes we drilled last year, that was the hole that started in the south zone and drilled to the southeast. It was a fairly shallowly inclined long hole, and outside of the gold-rich stockwork, the best results from that hole came down quite deep in another conglomerate unit, a deeper conglomerate unit than our main middle conglomerate. So there is still evidence that as we step further outside of the bounds of our geological model, we still do have some preferential host rocks that actually bear a lot of similarities to our preferential host rocks within our drilled zone. It's just a matter of getting more holes in that area and hopefully trying to trace those horizons up dip. Yeah, we don't know if we're on the other side of a fault. It does look like there's a very strong magnetic linear Porphyry Stock is emplaced along. And we just have very poor information, or very sparse information in those zones. So it'll be really interesting to see. The surface results from the soil samples are encouraging in the area, and the surface results from hole 9, which was, I guess, at the northern end of what we would consider the embayment zone, were quite encouraging as well. We know we're within the system. We know it's making copper mineralization and molybdenum mineralization, and we're getting gold kicks as well. So yeah, we just need to drill it.
Where did you say the rig is at Duke? It's on the western side of NAC, Tony?
Well, Neil doesn't know this for sure. I heard from someone else on the street, so I heard it's on the western margin of our property. So if you look at our property, if you think there's a top half and a bottom half, it's on the western margin of the top half. Okay. So maybe due west of hole 12.
All right. Just curious. I mean, it doesn't mean much until we know what they intersect, but yeah, okay. Just curious, Thank you, gentlemen. This was a fantastic conversation. Covered a lot of ground here. I look forward to a great summer from American Eagle. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This will be on my YouTube in the next couple of days. Cheers.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks.